I was sprinting down that hospital hallway like my lungs were on fire, sneakers squeaking against those sterile white floors, and all I could think about was getting to her, my wife, my Simone. They'd called me 20 minutes ago saying there were complications with the surgery, that I needed to come now, and my whole world had collapsed into that single word. Now. I could see the operating room ahead, those double doors with the round windows, and I was maybe 15 feet away when this nurse, this short black woman with gray streaks in her hair and eyes that looked like she'd seen death before, she grabbed my arm hard enough to bruise it. "Quick, sir," she whispered, her breath hot against my ear. "Hide and trust me. It's a trap." I didn't even have time to ask what she meant because she was already pushing me into a supply closet, and through the crack in the door, I watched. 10 minutes later, I saw something that made my blood turn to ice water in my veins. My wife, my Simone, walking out of that operating room on her own 2 feet, laughing with some man I'd never seen before, her hand resting on his chest like she owned it. She wasn't sick. She wasn't dying. She was acting. And in that moment, standing in the dark between mops and cleaning supplies, I realized that everything I thought I knew about my life was a lie someone had written for me to believe. My name is Marcus Anthony Webb. I'm 32 years old now, but when this story started, I was 30, living in Richmond, Virginia, in a little rental house off Broad Street that we couldn't really afford, but Simone said made her feel like we were going somewhere. Before I tell you what happened next, I need you to do something for me. Drop a comment right now and tell me where you're watching this from. Because what I'm about to tell you, I've never told anyone. Not my mama, not my boys, nobody. And if you've ever trusted someone with your whole heart only to find out they were counting on you being that stupid, you're going to feel every word of what comes next. The first time I saw Simone Carter, I was 26 years old, working double shifts at the Amazon warehouse in Petersburg. And I'd stopped at this little cafe on Chamberlain Avenue because my supervisor had been riding me all morning, and I needed coffee before I said something that would get me fired. She was sitting by the window in this yellow sundress that caught the light like honey, her natural hair pulled back in a puff. And she was reading Toni Morrison with her bottom lip between her teeth, the way people do when they're really concentrating. I'm not the type to approach women I don't know. My mama raised me to be respectful, to wait for a sign. But something about the way she looked up and smiled at me, like she'd been waiting for me to notice her, it made me walk over to her table before my brain could tell my feet to stop. We talked for 3 hours that day. She told me she was a medical assistant at VCU Health, that she'd moved to Richmond from Atlanta 2 years ago to get away from her ex, that she wanted a family someday, but only with a man who understood that love was work, not magic. I told her I was saving money to take classes at Reynolds Community College, that my dream was to become an electrician and start my own business, that I'd grown up in Church Hill with my grandmother after my parents died in a car accident when I was 8. When I finally left that cafe, I had her number in my phone, and this feeling in my chest like somebody had turned on a light in a room I didn't know was dark. We moved fast, maybe too fast, but when you grow up without much and you finally find something that feels like it could be yours, you hold on tight. 6 months after that cafe, we were living together in a studio apartment in Shockoe Bottom. A year after that, we were married at Greater Mount Zion Baptist Church with maybe 40 people there, mostly her co-workers and my boys from the warehouse. She wore white. I wore the only suit I owned. My boy Terrence, tall, dark-skinned brother I'd known since middle school, the kind of friend who'd give you his last $20 and act like you did him a favor by taking it. He stood next to me as my best man, and when the pastor said, "You may kiss your bride," Terrence was crying harder than my grandmother was. Simone had this way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room when she looked at you. And that day, standing in front of all those people, I believed we were starting something that would outlive us both. I believed that every sacrifice I'd made, every extra shift, every night I went to bed hungry so we could save for a house, every dream I'd put on hold, was building towards something permanent. I was wrong, but I didn't know that yet. All I knew was that I loved her so completely that it didn't occur to me to wonder if she loved me back the same way. The first 2 years were good, or at least I thought they were. We moved into that rental house on Broad Street, the one with the blue shutters and the porch that sagged a little on the left side. Simone kept talking about wanting to buy a real house with a backyard and a garage, somewhere in the West End where the schools were good, even though we didn't have kids yet. I picked up a third shift on weekends doing maintenance work for my supervisor's brother-in-law, trying to stack money faster, and Simone started working extra hours at the hospital. We barely saw each other some weeks. I'd be coming home when she was leaving. She'd be asleep when I got back. But every time I mentioned slowing down, she'd get this look on her face like I was giving up on us. "We're building something, Marcus," she'd say, her hand on my chest, her eyes searching mine. "Don't you want more than this?" And I did. God knows I did. So I kept working, kept grinding, kept believing that the exhaustion was temporary and the reward was coming. But there were small things I noticed and ignored because I didn't want to be the jealous husband, the suspicious man. Her phone that she started taking into the bathroom, the new perfume she wore on days she wasn't working, the way she'd smile at texts and then close her screen when I walked into the room. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself that the woman I married wouldn't do that to me. Then came the surgery. About 6 months before that day in the hospital hallway, Simone told me she'd been having stomach pains, that the doctors found something during a routine checkup, that she needed a procedure to remove what they thought might be a cyst. She said it was minor, outpatient, nothing to worry about. But the way she said it, with her eyes down, her voice soft, it made me worry anyway. I took a week off work without pay to be there for her, to drive her to appointments, to sit in waiting rooms while she talked to specialists. She seemed scared, and that fear felt real to me. I held her hand through it all. I prayed for her at night. I made her soup and rubbed her feet and told her everything would be okay because that's what you do when you love someone. The surgery got scheduled for a Wednesday in April. I remember because it was the day after my birthday, and she'd made me promise not to make a big deal about it, that we'd celebrate after she was better. I didn't argue. I just wanted her healthy. I just wanted us to get back to normal, whatever normal was. But the night before the surgery, she was on the phone in the bathroom for almost an hour, and when she came out, her eyes were red like she'd been crying. I asked her what was wrong, and she said she was just scared of the anesthesia, that she'd heard stories about people not waking up. I pulled her close and told her I'd be right there when she woke up, that I'd never leave her side. She kissed my forehead and whispered, "I know you won't." At the time, I thought she meant it as comfort. Now I know she meant it as a warning. The morning of the surgery, I drove her to VCU Medical Center before sunrise, the streets still dark and empty, and she was quiet the whole way there. I kept asking if she was okay, and she kept nodding, but her hands were shaking in her lap. They took her back around 7, and I sat in that waiting room with strangers who all had the same hollow look in their eyes, the look of people waiting to hear if someone they love is going to make it. 3 hours passed, then 4. I called Terrence, and he said he'd come sit with me, but I told him I was fine, that I just needed to wait. Around noon, a doctor I'd never seen before came out and called my name. He was white, maybe 50, with glasses that kept sliding down his nose, and he told me there were complications, that they needed to keep her longer, that I should go home and rest, and they'd call me with updates. I didn't want to leave, but he insisted, said the best thing I could do was take care of myself so I could take care of her when she came home. I left. I went home. I paced our living room for 3 hours until my phone rang at 3:47 p.m., and a woman's voice I didn't recognize said, "Mr. Webb, you need to come back now. There's been a development." I didn't ask what kind of development. I just ran to my car, broke every speed limit between our house and that hospital, and when I got there, I ran through those doors like a man who still believed he could save the person he loved. That's when the nurse grabbed me. That's when everything I thought I knew shattered like glass under a hammer. I couldn't breathe right in that supply closet. surrounded by the chemical smell of disinfectant and the darkness pressing in from all sides. The nurse, her name tag said Gloria. She was standing in front of me with her finger to her lips, and through the crack in the door, I could see my wife, my Simone, walking down that hallway in her regular clothes, not a hospital gown, laughing with this tall, light-skinned brother in expensive sneakers and a gold watch that caught the fluorescent lights. She looked healthy. She looked happy. She looked like someone who'd never been sick a day in her life. My hands were shaking so bad, I had to press them against the metal shelves to keep from making noise, and Gloria was watching me with these sad, knowing eyes, like she'd seen this exact scene play out before, with different people in different closets. When Simone and the man finally turned a corner and disappeared, Gloria opened the door just enough for me to slip out, and she pulled me into an empty patient room down the hall. "Sit down," she said, and her voice had that gentle firmness that nurses use when they're about to tell you something that's going to hurt worse than any needle. I sat on the edge of the hospital bed, and she closed the door behind us. "How long have you known?" I asked, and my voice didn't sound like mine. It sounded hollow, like someone had scooped out everything inside me and left just the shell. Gloria pulled up a chair and sat across from me, her hands folded in her lap like she was praying or trying to figure out how to tell me my life was a lie. "I didn't know for sure until today," she said. "But I suspected something was wrong about a month ago when your wife came in for a consultation with Dr. Pierce. That's the man you just saw her with. He's not even a surgeon. He's a hospitalist, works mostly with insurance claims and patient transfers. I thought it was strange that she'd be meeting with him about a surgery, so I checked the surgical schedule. Marcus, there was never a surgery scheduled for Day. There was never a cyst. There was never anything wrong with her." The room started spinning, and I had to grip the edge of the bed to keep from falling off. "Then what was all this?" I managed to say. "The appointments? The scans? The doctors?" Gloria sighed, and it was the kind of sigh that carried years of seeing people do terrible things to each other. "I don't have all the answers," she said, "but I know that Dr. Pierce has been under investigation for insurance fraud, fake procedures, billing for surgeries that never happened, splitting the payout with patients who agree to go along with it. If your wife has health insurance through her job or through you, and if she listed you as a beneficiary on any policies, then someone's been collecting money for a surgery that was never real." I wanted to throw up. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run out of that hospital and find Simone and ask her how she could do this, how she could look me in the eye every day and lie with a face so sincere I believed every word. But I just sat there frozen while Gloria kept talking. "I'm telling you this because I have a son your age," she said, "and if someone was doing this to him, I'd want someone to tell him the truth before it got worse. You need to be careful, Marcus. If she's involved in fraud, and if your name is on any of those insurance documents, you could be implicated too. You need to protect yourself. You need to get a lawyer. You need to figure out what she's been doing with your information." I nodded, but I wasn't really hearing her anymore. All I could think about was Simone's face the night before the fake surgery, the way she'd cried in my arms and told me she was scared, the way I'd promised to never leave her side. She'd used my love like a weapon against me. She'd counted on me being loyal, being stupid, being so desperate to believe in us that I wouldn't ask the right questions. And the worst part was, she was right. I hadn't asked. I hadn't doubted. I just loved her and trusted her, and now I was sitting in a hospital room being told by a stranger that my marriage was a crime scene I'd been living in without knowing it. Gloria gave me her phone number and told me to call her if I needed to testify or provide evidence. Then she left me alone in that room with the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead and my whole world crumbling around me. I don't know how long I sat there. Could have been 10 minutes. Could have been an hour. All I know is that when I finally stood up, my legs felt like they belonged to someone else. And when I walked out of that hospital into the parking lot, the sunlight felt too bright, too normal, like the world should have known to dim itself for what I was going through. I sat in my car and stared at my phone, at Simone's name in my contacts, at the picture of us from our wedding day that I'd kept as her contact photo. I wanted to call her. I wanted to confront her. But something Gloria said kept echoing in my head. Be careful. Protect yourself. Get a lawyer. So instead of calling my wife, I called the one person I knew would tell me the truth, even if it hurt. I called Terrence. He answered on the second ring, and I could hear the sounds of the warehouse in the background, forklifts beeping, people shouting, the constant hum of machinery that had been the soundtrack of my life for 6 years. Yo, Marcus, what's good? You at the hospital? I opened my mouth to answer, but nothing came out. Just this choking sound that I didn't recognize as crying until I felt the tears on my face. Marcus? Terrence's voice changed, got sharper, more alert. Man, what happened? Is Simone okay? She's fine, I finally managed to say. She was never sick, T. It was all fake. The surgery, the cyst, everything. She's been running some kind of scam with a doctor, and I don't even know. I couldn't finish. Couldn't say out loud that I didn't know if she ever loved me or if I was just a prop in whatever con she'd been running. Where are you? Terrence asked, and I could hear him moving, could picture him walking out of the warehouse into the parking lot the way he always did when something serious was happening. I'm coming to you right now. Don't move. Don't call her. Don't do nothing until I get there. He hung up, and I sat there in my car, watching people walk in and out of the hospital. People visiting sick relatives. People getting good news. People getting bad news. People living normal lives where the person they loved didn't fake a surgery to steal from them. 20 minutes later, Terrence pulled up in his beat-up Nissan, and when he got in my passenger seat and saw my face, he didn't say anything. He just grabbed my shoulder and held it, and that simple gesture, that acknowledgement that something in me had broken, it made me cry harder than I had since my grandmother died. We're going to figure this out, Terrence said, but first, you got to tell me everything. We drove to Terrence's apartment in Jackson Ward, a one-bedroom spot above a barber shop that always smelled like hair grease and aftershave, and he made me sit on his couch while he got me water I didn't drink and told me to start from the beginning. So I did. I told him about the cafe where I met Simone, about how fast we moved, about the wedding and the house and the dreams we talked about building together. I told him about the stomach pains she'd complained about 6 months ago, the doctor's appointments I'd driven her to, the fear in her eyes that seemed so real I never questioned it. I told him about Gloria, the nurse who pulled me into the supply closet, about seeing Simone walk out of that operating room with Dr. Pierce like it was just another Tuesday. And then I told him the part that was eating me alive from the inside out. She used me, T. She used my love, my trust, my name, and I don't even know what for yet. Terrence listened without interrupting, his jaw tight, his hands clenched into fists on his knees. And when I finally finished, he leaned back and stared at the ceiling like he was trying to decide how to say what he needed to say without making everything worse. Man, I hate to tell you this, Terrence started, and I could hear the reluctance in his voice. But this ain't the first time I've wondered about Simone. My head snapped up. What do you mean? He sighed and rubbed his face with both hands. About a year ago, maybe a little less, I saw her at Tobacco Company on Carey Street. I was there for my cousin's birthday, and I spotted her at the bar with some dude. Not Dr. Pierce. Someone else, younger, dressed nice. They were close, you know? Laughing, touching, the kind of close that don't look like friends. I thought about telling you, but I talked myself out of it. Told myself maybe it was a coworker, maybe I was seeing something that wasn't there. Maybe I just make you paranoid for no reason. But Marcus, the way she looked at that dude, it was the same way she used to look at you back when y'all first got together. The words hit me like a punch to the stomach, and suddenly, every strange moment from the past year started clicking into place like puzzle pieces I'd been ignoring. The late nights she said she was working, the new clothes she bought that I never saw her wear at home, the way she'd started talking about money differently, not like we were saving together, but like she had plans I wasn't part of. I need to check our accounts, I said, standing up so fast I almost knocked over the water glass. I need to see what she's been doing with our money. Terrence drove me back to my house, and the whole way there, I was running through everything in my head. We had a joint checking account at Wells Fargo, a small savings account I'd been contributing to for almost 3 years. And Simone had her own account for her paychecks that she said she kept separate for independence, which I'd respected because I didn't want to be that controlling husband. We pulled up to the house around 7 in the evening, the streetlights just starting to flicker on, and Simone's car wasn't in the driveway yet. I unlocked the door with shaking hands, went straight to our bedroom, and pulled out the laptop we shared. I logged into our bank accounts, and what I saw made my blood run cold. Our joint checking account, the one I'd been depositing my paychecks into for 2 years, had $127 in it. The savings account I'd been building, the one that should have had at least $8,000, had been cleaned out 3 weeks ago, transferred to an account I didn't recognize. I clicked through the transaction history, and there it was. Dozens of transfers over the past 6 months, small enough that I wouldn't notice if I wasn't looking carefully, all going to an account with Simone's name and someone else's I'd never heard of. Terrence was standing behind me, looking over my shoulder, and I heard him curse under his breath. "She's been draining you, bro. Slowly. Setting up something with someone else." I kept clicking, kept digging, and that's when I found the insurance documents. Simone had taken out a life insurance policy on me 8 months ago. $250,000, and I was listed as the insured, but she was the sole beneficiary, and I'd never signed anything, never agreed to it, never even knew it existed. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely move the mouse. "Terrence," I said, and my voice cracked on his name. "She took out life insurance on me. $250,000, and I never knew." He grabbed my shoulder, and his voice was deadly serious when he said, "That's potentially conspiracy to commit murder, especially if we can prove she was planning to harm you to collect the payout." The words "conspiracy to commit murder" hit me like a train. I'd been so focused on the betrayal, on the lies, that I hadn't fully processed what Simone had said about the policy being insurance in case you figured things out too soon. Had she been planning to kill me? Had I escaped something worse than just a broken heart? "We're going to need to bring her in for questioning," Detective Harris continued, "but I need you to understand something. If she's as smart as you say she is, she's probably already in the wind. People who run cons like this usually have an exit strategy." I went home that afternoon to find the house exactly as Simone had left it, her closet half empty, her toiletries gone from the bathroom, the photos of us still hanging on the walls like ghosts of a life that had never existed. I started taking them down, one by one, and with each frame I pulled off the wall, I felt a little bit of the rage building inside me. Not just rage at Simone, but rage at myself for being so blind, so trusting, so desperate to believe in something permanent that I'd ignored every red flag. There had been signs, of course there had been signs, but I'd explained them all away because the alternative was too painful to consider. The phone calls she took in private, the sudden interest in my work schedule, the way she'd started asking about my health insurance and my family medical history. I thought she was being caring, being thoughtful. I thought she wanted to take care of me the way I was trying to take care of her. But she'd been gathering information, building a case, setting up the pieces for a con that could have ended with me dead. Terrence stayed with me that first week. He slept on the couch, made sure I ate, dragged me out of the house when I started spiraling into dark thoughts about how I'd wasted 2 years of my life on someone who'd never even liked me. "You didn't waste anything," he kept telling me. "You loved someone. That's not a waste, even if they didn't deserve it. What she did to you says everything about who she is and nothing about who you are." But it didn't feel that way. It felt like I'd been stupid, naive, like everyone had probably known, and I'd been the last one to figure it out. I started going through our shared spaces, looking for more evidence of her deception, and I found it everywhere. A burner phone hidden in a shoebox in her closet with texts between her and Dr. Pierce about the mark and the timeline. A notebook with my social security number, my mother's maiden name, my bank account numbers. Everything someone would need to steal my identity written down in her handwriting like a shopping list. Credit card statements for cards I'd never seen, opened in my name, with charges at restaurants and hotels I'd never been to. Each discovery was another wound, another layer of betrayal. And by the time Detective Harris came to collect the evidence 3 days later, I had filled 2 boxes with proof that my marriage had been a carefully constructed crime. "This is good," Detective Harris said, going through the boxes in my living room while Terrence and I watched. "This is really good, Mr. Webb. The burner phone alone gives us a direct line to Dr. Pierce, and if we can get him to flip on her, we might be able to build a case that sticks." She looked up at me with something like sympathy in her eyes. "I know this is hard, but you're doing the right thing. A lot of people in your situation would be too embarrassed to come forward, would just take the loss and move on. But what she did to you, what she was planning to do to you, that's not something you just let go." I nodded, but I wasn't sure I believed her. What was the alternative? Let Simone get away with it? Let her move on to the next trusting man and do this all over again? "Have you found her?" I asked, and Detective Harris shook her head. "Not yet. She checked out of the Hilton downtown 2 days ago and hasn't used any of the credit cards we're monitoring. She's either using cash or she's already left the state. We've issued a warrant for her arrest, and we've contacted the FBI since this crosses state lines if she's fled to D.C. to be with this Jerome person. But I'm not going to lie to you. People like her are good at disappearing, especially if they've been planning it for a while." That night, alone in the house after Terrence went home to get some sleep, I sat in the dark and thought about the first time Simone told me she loved me. We'd been together for maybe 3 months, lying in bed after making love, and she traced patterns on my chest with her finger and said, "I love you, Marcus. I love how safe you make me feel." I'd said it back immediately, without hesitation, because I'd been feeling it for weeks and was just waiting for the right moment. Now I wondered if anything about that moment had been real, or if even then she'd been calculating, measuring, figuring out how to make me believe in something that would keep me compliant and useful. The worst part wasn't the money she'd stolen or the fraud she'd committed. The worst part was knowing that every intimate moment, every whispered promise, every time she'd looked at me like I mattered, it had all been performance. She'd weaponized my loneliness, my need to be loved, my desire to build something permanent after growing up with nothing. And she'd done it so well that I'd never suspected, not even once, until a stranger in a hospital pulled me into a supply closet and saved my life. 2 weeks after Simone disappeared, Detective Harris called and asked me to come down to the station. When I got there, she led me to a small conference room where a white woman in her late 50s was sitting, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee like she was trying to absorb its warmth. "Marcus, this is Patricia Davidson," Detective Harris said. "She has a story I think you need to hear." Patricia looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes that told me she'd been crying recently, and when she spoke, her voice was hoarse. "My son Daniel died 3 years ago," she said. "They ruled it an accidental overdose. He had a history of depression and substance abuse issues, but I never believed it. Daniel was getting better. He was in therapy. He'd been clean for 8 months, and then he married a woman named Simone Carter, and 6 months later, he was dead." The room tilted. I grabbed at the back of a chair to steady myself. "She was married before?" I managed to say, and Patricia nodded. "Married him in Atlanta in 2021. 6 months later, Daniel died from what the coroner said was a combination of prescription pills and alcohol. Simone collected a $200,000 life insurance policy and moved to Richmond before I could even plan his funeral." Detective Harris pulled out a file and slid it across the table to me. Inside were photos of Daniel Davidson, a thin white guy with kind eyes and a nervous smile, and copies of their marriage certificate, his death certificate, and the insurance payout documentation. "Patricia has been investigating Simone on her own for the past 2 years, Detective Harris explained. "When your case came across my desk and I ran Simone's background, Patricia's complaints to the Atlanta PD showed up. She's been trying to get someone to take her seriously, but without hard evidence of foul play, the case stayed closed." Patricia leaned forward, her eyes intense. "But I know she killed him, Mr. Webb. I know it in my bones. Daniel called me 2 days before he died and said something strange was happening, that Simone had been asking weird questions about his medication and his life insurance, that he was starting to think she'd only married him for his money. He said he was going to talk to a lawyer, and then he was dead. I felt sick. I sank into a chair and put my head in my hands. How many others? I asked, and my voice sounded far away. How many other men has she done this to? We don't know yet, Detective Harris said, but we're looking. Patricia finding you, well, you finding us, it's opened up the investigation in a way it couldn't be before. We're going through marriage records, death certificates, insurance payouts. We're building a pattern. Patricia reached across the table and grabbed my hand, and her grip was surprisingly strong. You got out, she said, and there were tears in her eyes. You got out alive, Mr. Webb. My Daniel didn't. So whatever you're feeling right now, anger, shame, embarrassment, you push that aside and you help these detectives catch her. You help them make sure she never does this to another family. I squeezed her hand back and something shifted in me. This wasn't just about my broken heart anymore. This wasn't just about the money she'd stolen or the trust she'd violated. This was about a woman who had potentially killed Patricia's son and was out there right now, possibly setting up her next victim. I'll do whatever you need, I told Detective Harris. Whatever it takes to stop her. She nodded, satisfied. Good, because we're going to need you to testify when we catch her. And we will catch her, Mr. Webb. People like Simone always get too confident, always make a mistake. It's just a matter of time. Over the next few weeks, I learned more about my wife than I'd learned in the 2 years we were together. Detective Harris and her team discovered that Simone Carter wasn't even her real name. She'd been born Simone Washington in Memphis, Tennessee, and had changed her name twice, once after a fraud conviction in Texas when she was 23, and again after Daniel Davidson's death. She had a juvenile record for theft and forgery. She dropped out of college after 1 semester. The medical assistant job at VCU Health was real, but she'd been fired 2 months before I met her for stealing prescription pads, and she'd never told me. Everything about her past that she'd shared with me, the abusive ex in Atlanta, the family she didn't talk to, the dreams of becoming a nurse someday, all of it was lies designed to make her seem vulnerable, sympathetic, worthy of being rescued. And I'd fallen for every single word. The FBI eventually tracked her to a small town outside Charlotte, North Carolina, where she'd been living with Jerome, the lawyer from D.C. Except Jerome wasn't a lawyer. He was a car salesman named Gerald, who'd met her on a dating app 3 months ago, and thought she was a widow grieving her dead husband. When the FBI showed up to arrest her, she tried to run, and they found her in the parking lot of a Walmart with $47,000 in cash, 3 fake IDs, and a burner phone with messages to Dr. Pierce about starting over in Florida. The day they arrested her, Detective Harris called me and asked if I wanted to be there for the arraignment. I said yes. I needed to see her. I needed to look her in the eye and know that this was real, that she wasn't going to talk her way out of this the way she talked her way into my life. The courthouse was in downtown Richmond, and when they brought her in wearing an orange jumpsuit and handcuffs, she looked smaller than I remembered, less powerful, more human. She scanned the courtroom, and when her eyes landed on me, sitting in the front row next to Patricia Davidson, something flickered across her face. Surprise, maybe, or annoyance that I dared to show up. The prosecutor read the charges: insurance fraud, identity theft, conspiracy to commit murder, and in Daniel Davidson's case, second-degree murder, based on new evidence that she'd been systematically poisoning him with crushed pills mixed into his food for weeks before his death. Simone's lawyer, a public defender who looked exhausted before the hearing even started, entered a plea of not guilty, and bail was set at $500,000, which she couldn't make. As they let her out, she turned and looked at me one more time, and I waited for her to say something, to show some kind of remorse or acknowledgement of what she'd done. But she just smiled, that same sweet smile she'd given me the day we met in the cafe, and mouthed the words, "You were easy," and then she was gone. The months after Simone's arrest were the hardest of my life, harder even than losing my parents, harder than growing up poor, harder than any physical pain I'd ever experienced. Because grief has a shape to it. You know what you're mourning, you know what you lost. But what I was feeling didn't have a name. I was mourning a relationship that had never existed. I was grieving the loss of a future that had always been a lie. I was angry at her, but I was angrier at myself for being the kind of man who could be fooled so completely. I stopped going to work at the warehouse. I told my supervisor I needed time, and he said he understood, but I could hear the judgment in his voice. Could imagine what people were saying about me behind my back. That's Marcus, the guy whose wife tried to kill him for insurance money. That's Marcus, the fool who didn't see it coming. Terrence tried to get me out of the house, tried to remind me that I still had a life to live, but I couldn't shake the feeling that everything I'd built was tainted now, corrupted by her touch. The house where we'd lived felt haunted. The bed where we'd slept felt contaminated. Even the dreams I'd had for the future felt stupid and childish, like I'd been playing house while she was playing a much more dangerous game. I started seeing a therapist, a black man in his 60s named Dr. Monroe, who specialized in trauma and betrayal. And in our first session, I sat on his couch and said, I don't know how to trust myself anymore. If I couldn't see what was happening in my own marriage, how am I supposed to trust any decision I make? Dr. Monroe leaned back in his chair and said something I wasn't expecting. Marcus, you're asking the wrong question. The question isn't why you didn't see it. The question is why she was so good at hiding it. Predators, and that's what your wife was, a predator. They're skilled at finding good people and exploiting their goodness. Your ability to love and trust isn't a weakness. It's what makes you human. What she did to you wasn't your fault. It was her choice, her crime, her moral failing. I wanted to believe him, but believing him meant accepting that I'd done nothing wrong. And if I'd done nothing wrong, then I had to accept that the world was crueler and more random than I wanted it to be, that you could do everything right and still get destroyed by someone else's evil. How do I move forward, I asked, and Dr. Monroe said, one day at a time. One decision at a time. You start by forgiving yourself for being human. Forgiving myself was harder than I expected. Every time I made progress, I'd find something in the house that reminded me of her. A hair tie on the bathroom counter, a book she'd left on the nightstand, a coffee mug with her lipstick still on the rim, and I'd spiral all over again. Terrence finally convinced me to pack up everything that was hers and put it in storage until the trial was over and the divorce was finalized. You can't heal in a museum, he said. You gotta make this place yours again. So we spent a weekend boxing up her clothes, her shoes, her jewelry, all the things she'd left behind when she ran. And with each box we sealed, I felt a little bit lighter, a little bit more like maybe I could breathe again. We painted the bedroom a different color, gray instead of the pale blue she'd chosen. We rearranged the furniture. We took down the wedding photos and replaced them with pictures of me and Terrence, me and my grandmother, me at my high school graduation looking young and hopeful and unbroken. There, Terrence said when we finished. Now it's your house, not hers, yours. But the nightmares didn't stop. 2-3 times a week, I'd wake up in a cold sweat from dreams where Simone was standing over me with a pillow, or I'd find crushed pills in my coffee, or I'd be at my own funeral watching her cry fake tears while she collected the insurance check. Dr. Monroe said it was normal, that my brain was processing the trauma, trying to make sense of the fact that I'd been in danger and hadn't known it. You lived with someone who was capable of murder, he said. Your subconscious is catching up to what your conscious mind already knows. Give it time. But time felt impossible. The trial wasn't scheduled for another 8 months. The divorce was moving slowly because Simone kept firing her lawyers and demanding continuances. And every day that passed, I felt stuck, frozen between the life I'd had and the life I was supposed to build next. I eventually went back to work at the warehouse, but it wasn't the same. My coworkers didn't know how to talk to me. Some avoided me altogether. Others asked too many questions, wanted details about the case that I wasn't allowed to share because of the ongoing investigation. I felt like a circus act, like everyone was watching me to see if I'd break. The only bright spot was Patricia Davidson. She and I started meeting once a week at a coffee shop in Carytown, and we'd talk about Daniel, about Simone, about how we were both trying to survive the aftermath of loving someone who'd never loved us back. Patricia showed me videos of Daniel playing guitar, told me stories about the sweet, sensitive boy he'd been before depression and addiction had gotten their hooks in him. He would have liked you, she said one afternoon. He was always drawn to people who were genuine, who wore their hearts on their sleeves. That's why Simone was able to get to him. That's why she was able to get to you. She found the best parts of you and turned them into weapons. We became each other's lifeline, checking in daily, sharing updates about the case, reminding each other that we weren't alone in this. And when the prosecutor called to tell us they'd found evidence linking Simone to a third victim, a man named Robert Chin, who died in a car accident in Tennessee 2 years before she married Daniel, another life insurance payout, another convenient death. Patricia and I sat in that coffee shop and cried together, not just for our own losses, but for all the people Simone had destroyed in her pursuit of money and freedom. 6 months after Simone's arrest, the FBI finally got Dr. Pierce to cooperate. He'd been arrested the same day as Simone, charged with insurance fraud and conspiracy, and his lawyer had been negotiating a plea deal in exchange for testimony against her. When Detective Harris called to tell me Dr. Pierce had agreed to talk, she asked if I wanted to hear what he had to say. I said yes. I needed to understand how deep this went, how many people had been involved in the plan to destroy me. The meeting took place at the FBI field office in Richmond, in a cold, sterile room with fluorescent lights that made everyone look sick. Dr. Pierce was already there when I arrived, wearing a suit that looked expensive but wrinkled, like he'd been wearing it for days. He was probably 45, light-skinned black man with graying hair and the kind of face that would have made you trust him if you didn't know what he'd done. He didn't look at me when I sat down, just stared at his hands folded on the table like they belonged to someone else. The prosecutor, a young black woman named Assistant U.S. Attorney Jenkins, started the interview by asking Dr. Pierce to explain how he'd met Simone. He cleared his throat and said, "She approached me about 2 years ago at a medical conference in Atlanta, said she was a medical assistant looking to get into pharmaceutical sales. We talked for a while, and she was smart, charming, easy to talk to. We exchanged numbers, started meeting for coffee, then drinks, then dinner. Within a month, we were sleeping together." He paused, and I felt my stomach turn. She'd been sleeping with him before she even met me. She told me she was single, ambitious, willing to do what it took to get ahead. And then one night, she pitched me the idea. She said she knew people, vulnerable people, people who trusted easily, who could be convinced to go along with fake medical procedures for a cut of the insurance payout. Small stuff at first, outpatient procedures that wouldn't raise red flags. We'd bill the insurance, split the money, and everyone would walk away happy. I wanted to reach across the table and strangle him. "And you just said yes?" I asked, breaking the silence. "You just agreed to defraud people, to put false information in medical records, to risk your whole career?" Dr. Pierce finally looked at me, and there was something like shame in his eyes, but it was buried under layers of self-pity and justification. "I was drowning in student loan debt," he said. "I had a terrible divorce, child support payments I could barely afford, and I'd made some bad investments that left me broke. Simone made it sound easy, victimless, just paperwork, just numbers on a page. Except I was the victim," I said, and my voice was shaking. "I was the one whose bank account you drained. I was the one whose identity you stole. I was the one whose life you were willing to destroy." He flinched, but didn't argue. Attorney Jenkins stepped in, redirecting him. "Tell Mr. Webb about the life insurance policy." Dr. Pierce took a deep breath. That wasn't part of the original plan. The fake surgery, the insurance fraud, that was supposed to be it. But about 3 months into our arrangement, Simone started talking about bigger payouts, about how medical fraud was small time, and we needed to think long term. She told me about Daniel Davidson, about how she'd collected $200,000 when he died, about how easy it had been to make it look like an accident. And she said she had someone new, someone trusting, someone who wouldn't suspect anything if he got sick. That's when I knew she was talking about murder. The room went silent. Attorney Jenkins leaned forward. "And what did you do with that information, Dr. Pierce?" He looked down again, and when he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. I should have gone to the police. I should have stopped her. But I was already in too deep with the fraud, and I thought if I just went along with it, kept her happy, maybe she'd change her mind or move on to someone else. So I helped her take out the life insurance policy on you, Mr. Webb. I signed paperwork as your consulting physician, even though I'd never examined you. I lied to the insurance company about your health history. And when Simone started talking about making you sick, about using medication that would cause a heart attack or a stroke, I told her I couldn't be part of that. That's when she cut me out of the bigger plan. She said she'd handle it herself, that I'd still get my cut of the medical fraud, but the life insurance payout was hers alone. I couldn't breathe, couldn't process what I was hearing. Simone hadn't just been planning to defraud me, she'd been planning to kill me, and this man sitting across from me had known and done nothing. You could have saved me, I said, and I heard my voice crack. You could have warned me, could have called someone, could have done literally anything, but instead you just let her keep going. You let her set me up to die. I know, Dr. Pierce said, and now there were tears in his eyes. I know, and I have to live with that. But when she faked the surgery, when she had you come to the hospital that day, I panicked. I told one of the nurses, Gloria, I told her something was wrong, that Mr. Webb might be in danger, that she needed to watch out for him. I didn't tell her everything, but I told her enough that she knew to hide you, to show you the truth. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Mr. Webb. I know I don't deserve it, but I did try to stop her at the end, in the only way I could without implicating myself. I thought about Gloria, the nurse who'd pulled me into that supply closet, who'd saved my life with a whispered warning. She'd been Dr. Pierce's guilty conscience, his last-ditch attempt to undo the damage he'd helped create. You're a coward, I said, standing up. You're a coward, and you're just as guilty as she is. I hope you go to prison for the rest of your life. Attorney Jenkins stood too, signaling the end of the interview. Dr. Pierce has agreed to testify against Simone in exchange for a reduced sentence, she said. He'll serve 5 years for the fraud, and his medical license has been permanently revoked. I know that's not the justice you want, but his testimony will help us put Simone away for life. I nodded, but I didn't feel victorious. I just felt tired, hollowed out, like I'd been carrying something heavy for so long that even setting it down didn't bring relief. The trial started on a cold morning in February, almost a year after Simone had walked out of that operating room and destroyed my life. The courtroom was packed. Reporters, curious onlookers, Patricia Davidson and her family, Terrence sitting right behind me for support. And when they brought Simone in, I almost didn't recognize her. She'd cut her hair short, dyed it a different color, and she was wearing a conservative gray suit that made her look like a school teacher instead of a predator. But when she glanced at me, just for a second, I saw the same cold calculation in her eyes that I'd seen that night in our living room. And I knew that whatever performance she was about to put on for the jury, the real Simone was still in there, still scheming, still convinced she could talk her way out of this. The prosecutor's opening statement laid out the full scope of Simone's crimes. Robert Chin in Tennessee, dead at 34 from a car accident that investigators now believed was caused by Simone tampering with his brake lines. Daniel Davidson in Atlanta, dead at 29 from a combination of prescription drugs that Simone had been systematically crushing into his food for weeks. And me, Marcus Webb, the one who got away because a guilty doctor and a vigilant nurse had intervened at the last possible moment. The first witness was Patricia Davidson, and watching her testify about finding her son dead, about the way Simone had cried at his funeral while secretly planning her next move, about the years she'd spent trying to get someone to believe that her boy had been murdered, it broke something in me. I looked at Simone, waiting for some sign of remorse, some flicker of humanity. But she just sat there taking notes like this was a business meeting and not a reckoning for the lives she destroyed. Dr. Pierce testified next, and he laid out the entire fraud scheme in excruciating detail. The fake medical consultations, the forged insurance documents, the way Simone had coached him on exactly what to say to make everything look legitimate. He admitted to knowing about her plans to kill me and doing nothing, And when Simone's lawyer cross-examined him, trying to paint him as an unreliable witness with his own agenda, Dr. Pierce looked directly at Simone and said, "I was weak and I was greedy, but I never wanted anyone to die. She did. She planned it. She enjoyed it. And if you're looking for a monster in this courtroom, she's sitting right there." The jury shifted uncomfortably, and I saw a few of them glance at Simone with something like horror on their faces. But the most devastating testimony came from Gloria, the nurse who'd saved my life. She explained how Dr. Pierce had come to her 3 days before the fake surgery, how he told her that a patient named Marcus Webb might be in danger, how she should watch for anything suspicious. "I didn't know the full extent of what was happening," Gloria testified, "but I knew something was wrong. And when I saw Mrs. Webb walking out of that operating room, laughing with Dr. Pierce, looking perfectly healthy when she was supposed to be in recovery from surgery, I knew Mr. Webb needed to see the truth before it was too late." She described pulling me into the supply closet, showing me what Simone really was. And when the prosecutor asked why she'd risked her job to help a stranger, Gloria looked right at me and said, "Because I have a son his age, and if someone was planning to hurt him, I'd want someone to care enough to intervene. Mr. Webb deserved to know his life was in danger. He deserved a chance to save himself." I started crying right there in the courtroom, and Terrence put his hand on my shoulder while I tried to pull myself together. Then it was my turn to testify. I walked to the witness stand on shaking legs, put my hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. The prosecutor asked me to tell the jury about my relationship with Simone, and I did. I told them about the cafe, about the yellow sundress, about how quickly I'd fallen in love because I was lonely and she seemed perfect. I told them about the fake surgery, about the drained bank accounts, about the life insurance policy I'd never consented to. I told them about the night she'd confessed, about the cruelty in her voice when she called me stupid and useful and easy. And then the prosecutor asked the question I'd been dreading. "Mr. Webb, do you believe your wife was planning to kill you?" I looked at Simone, and she stared back at me without blinking, without emotion, like we were strangers who'd never shared a life or a bed or whispered promises in the dark. "Yes," I said, and my voice was steady for the first time in months. "I believe if Gloria hadn't warned me, if I hadn't found out the truth when I did, I would be dead right now. I believe Simone would have made it look like an accident or a sudden illness, would have collected the insurance money, and would have moved on to her next victim without ever looking back. I believe I survived not because I was smart or strong, but because I got lucky. And I believe she needs to be stopped before she kills someone else." Simone's lawyer tried to discredit me during cross-examination, tried to make it seem like I was a scorned husband exaggerating the danger, but the evidence was overwhelming. The burner phone with text messages about the mark, the notebook with my personal information, the testimony from 3 different insurance investigators about the pattern of fraud, the forensic accountant who traced $180,000 in stolen funds from my accounts to Simone's offshore accounts, the toxicology report from Daniel Davidson's exhumation that showed levels of sedatives in his system consistent with long-term poisoning. By the time the prosecution rested, there was no doubt in anyone's mind what Simone had done. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. When they came back, the forewoman, a middle-aged black woman who'd cried during Patricia's testimony, read the verdict: guilty on all counts: insurance fraud, identity theft, second-degree murder in the death of Daniel Davidson, conspiracy to commit murder in my case. Simone's face didn't change. She just nodded, like she'd expected this, like it was all part of some larger plan I still couldn't see. But when the judge sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole, I saw something crack in her composure. Just for a second, she looked scared. And then the mask came back, and they led her away in handcuffs, and I never saw her again. It's been 2 years since the trial ended, and I'm sitting here in my house now, not ours, trying to figure out how to tell you what peace looks like after your whole world burns down. It doesn't look like forgiveness. I haven't forgiven Simone, and I don't think I ever will. What she did to me, to Daniel, to Robert Chin, To all the people whose lives she destroyed in her pursuit of money and freedom, that's not something you forgive. That's something you survive and carry and eventually learn to live with, like a scar that never quite stops aching. But I found something else, something I didn't expect. I found myself again. The Marcus who existed before Simone, the one who believed in goodness and worked hard and dreamed about building something permanent, he's not gone. He's just older now, wiser, more careful about who he lets into his heart. I'm back at the warehouse, and I've started taking classes at Reynolds Community College like I always planned. I'm studying to be an electrician, and I'm good at it. And for the first time in years, I'm building toward a future that's mine alone. I still see Dr. Monroe every other week, and we talk about trust and trauma and how to open yourself up to connection again without assuming everyone is out to hurt you. It's hard work, harder than any physical labor I've ever done, but it's worth it because I'm starting to feel like a person again instead of a victim. Patricia Davidson and I are still close. We meet for coffee once a month, and we talk about Daniel and Marcus and the strange bond that forms between people who've survived the same monster. She's become like family to me, and when she hugs me goodbye, she always says, "You're still here, Marcus. You're still here, and that matters." And I'm starting to believe her. I've even started dating again, slowly, carefully. There's a woman named Angela who works at the library near my house, and we've been seeing each other for about 6 months. She knows about Simone. I told her everything on our third date because I refused to start another relationship with secrets. And instead of running, she held my hand and said, "That must have been so hard. I'm glad you made it through." She's patient with me when I get anxious about her being late or when I ask too many questions about where she's been. She understands that trust is something I'm rebuilding brick by brick. The house doesn't feel haunted anymore. I've made it mine. New furniture, new paint, new memories that have nothing to do with Simone. Terrence comes over most Sundays, and we watch football and talk about our lives, and he never lets me forget that I'm loved, that I matter, that what happened to me wasn't my fault. "You're one of the strongest people I know," he told me last week, and I laughed because I don't feel strong most days. I feel tired and scarred and like I'm constantly waiting for the other shoe to drop. But he said, "Strength isn't about not getting hurt, Marcus. It's about getting hurt and deciding to keep living anyway. That's what you're doing. That's what makes you strong." I think about Simone sometimes, locked away in that prison, and I wonder if she ever thinks about what she did, if she ever feels anything close to remorse. Probably not. People like her don't change, don't grow, don't develop consciences in their 40s that they didn't have in their 30s. She is what she is, and the best I can do is make sure my life isn't defined by what she tried to take from me. I'm more than her victim. I'm a man who loved and lost and survived. I'm a man who's learning to trust again. I'm a man who's building a future one day at a time. If you're watching this from wherever you are in the world, and I really want you to drop a comment right now and tell me where you're watching from, because it helps me know I'm not alone in this. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you loved, if you've ever had your trust weaponized against you, if you've ever felt like you were too stupid or too blind to see what was right in front of you, I need you to hear this. It wasn't your fault. Loving someone isn't a weakness. Trusting someone isn't a failure. The people who prey on good hearts, who exploit kindness, who turn love into a con game, they're the ones who are broken, not you. You survived. You're still here. And that's worth everything. I didn't tell anyone this story for years. Not my coworkers, not distant relatives, not even my grandmother before she passed. But I'm telling you now because silence gives power to shame, and I refuse to be ashamed of being human, of being trusting, of being someone who believed in forever, even when forever was a lie. This is my story. This is what happened when I ran to see my wife in the operating room, and a stranger whispered, "Quick, sir, hide and trust me, it's a trap." This is what happened when I froze and saw her walking out on her own 2 feet, laughing with another man, proving that everything I believed about us was built on sand. I thought I was saving her life that day. Turns out Gloria and Dr. Pierce's guilty conscience saved mine. And now I'm here, 2 years later, still breathing, still fighting, still learning what it means to build a life on truth instead of lies. That was the day I realized peace don't come cheap. It costs everything you thought you knew. It demands you let go of the person you were and become someone new. But on the other side of that cost, on the other side of the pain and the betrayal and the long nights wondering if you'll ever feel whole again, there's life, real life, messy and complicated and sometimes still scary, but real. And I'll take real over perfect any day of the week. So if you've made it this far, if you've stayed with me through all 10 chapters of this nightmare turned survival story, do me a favor. Hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and drop a comment telling me what part of the world you're watching from. Tell me if you love these true tales, these stories about real people surviving real pain. Tell me I'm not alone in this. Because at the end of the day, that's all any of us really want. To know that someone out there understands, that someone out there cares, that our stories matter even when they break us. My name is Marcus Anthony Webb. I'm 32 years old. I live in Richmond, Virginia, in a house I'm slowly making into a home, and I'm still here. Against all odds, despite someone's best efforts to erase me for an insurance payout, I'm still here. And if that's not worth celebrating, I don't know what is.